Is this still the scariest King book I've ever read? Stay tuned and find out. Alright guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Zach with Zacks Books, and today I've got for you my Pet Sematary rant review by Stephen King. So, okay, this book I have lots of thoughts on and lots of opinions on, and I want to talk about them in this video because that's what the point of these are. It's a rant review. It's the third time? I think it's the third time I've read Pet Sematary. And full disclosure, at the very end I will tell you where it ranks among the other Stephen King books I've read, and I'm going to tell you I honestly during this video I'm going to need to think about where it's going to be placed, so just saying. But yeah, so don't forget to check out the links down below. We got the podcast, the Patreon, the Bookstagram, Danielle's channel. We'll link this book down below if you're intrigued with it. And yeah, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and let's get into Pet Sematary. Alright, so Pet Sematary, Stephen King. This book, to answer my question in the intro, yes, it is still the scariest Stephen King book that I have read. There are so many terrifying things in this book, and the other question I wanted to answer, which is a question I asked myself and what other people had said, is does this book hit different after you've had a child? And I'm going to say point blank, yes. This definitely hit me a lot different having Maverick in our lives with this book. So this story is pure terror. It's got some very happy moments, and a chunk of those happy moments happen between like the father and son, in my opinion. Like there's a chunk like right before like a tragedy happens where like they're playing and like it's a really cute moment, and like those are the parts that really got me, is when there's like little Gage and Dad moments. So if you don't know what this book is about, found the Creed family. Ellie, Gage are the children. There is Lewis and there is Rachel. Then they also have Church the cat, Winston Churchill. And they get this new house. Lewis is about to be the doctor up at a college. And this is in Ludlow, Maine, which is one of the big spots for Stephen King. Cujo is referenced in this book. Judd mentioned something about it. Judd Crandall. One of my favorite Stephen King characters. He is, albeit this time around, I did kind of have the perspective of like, yeah, he's a great character, but he's kind of the one who introduced the power to Louis Creed about the Pet Sematary. So, I don't know, but I also really like Jack Torrance, and we all know what he did. So, but yeah, besides that, what happens in this book is the Creed family just moved to this new town. Dad's going to be a doctor at a college. And this book is all about death. And like how it's coped with by certain people, different people. Like Rachel copes with death way differently than like anybody else. And that's one of the factors that I'm going to talk about with her later on. But ultimately, it's a book about death. And like, it's a really sad book. It's really depressing, but it's also really terrifying. There's a lot of scary aspects in this book, and the biggest factors, like if you could bring somebody back you love to life, would you do it? And the thing that stinks about this circumstance is they don't come back the same. Again, our book club, the Dead is Better book club, is based off of the quote that Judd says, sometimes dead is better. Sometimes dead is better. And yeah, this is a 5-star book. I'm not even gonna, there's no sugarcoating it. This is a 5-star book, and I'll talk about my rating in a little bit. Now, a tragedy strikes the Creed family when Rachel, Ellie, and Gage are having Thanksgiving with her parents in Chicago. And I really hate Rachel's parents. They are like some of the worst characters in Stephen King books, and they're just terrible people. The pure fact, backstory with Rachel is she had an older sister, only like 2 years older. Her name was Zelda, and she had spine. I don't know how to say that word, but her back was all messed up. It was twisted, something spinal meningitis or something like that. I don't know if that's the actual term they use. It's something spine and then meningitis. And she basically is like twisted. She's deformed. Like she's not like well physically. And the family just kind of keeps her in a back room, like away from like other people because they like don't want to like deal with her basically. And one night, Rachel's parents leave to go visit somebody and they leave her in charge of her. Meanwhile, Rachel's 8. She's only an 8-year-old, and she's being left in charge of her older sister, who's like very sick and like not doing well. And ultimately, a tragedy happens to her, and yeah. So I'm gonna say spoilers ahead going forward, just because that's basically the gist of the book. It's about tragedy, it's about death, and like coping with it, and the extremes of what you would do to bring someone back if you had the ability to, and the repercussions of that action. And it's a really good book, and I really hate the fact that I have so many King books that can be my number one, that I absolutely am like, I'm so torn with this one. So, spoilers going forward, Rachel has to deal with the loss of her older sister, like she's traumatized by it. And ever since, she is like not really embraced death nicely. Anytime, Lewis mentions in the book that anytime there's been a funeral, Rachel hasn't gone. There's somebody who's a really close friend to them, passed away, she didn't go, Lewis did. Judd Crandall's wife has got arthritis, really bad arthritis, and it progressively gets worse throughout part of the book, and eventually she succumbs to death. And Rachel, again, doesn't want to go to the funeral, but Lewis and Ellie do. Ellie's a bit more intrigued with death because she's a little girl. She's not really quite sure about it. Then another tragedy strikes the family when Church the cat dies. They have this giant road in between where Judd and Lewis lives, and basically like Renko trucks, I think is what they're called, Renko trucks. And they speed through there back and forth day and night, all throughout the night, and the morning of Thanksgiving, or the day of Thanksgiving, Judd calls Lewis over and says, "Hey, I think you've got a spot of trouble here. I've got what appears to be your cat laying in my yard." And Church dies, and Ellie absolutely loves Church, favorite cat in the world. Something else that I neglected to mention earlier, which is kind of hilarious because it's literally the name of the damn book. The plot of land they bought has what's called the pet cemetery in it. And there's a path that's like a couple miles long, and it leads to the pet cemetery, which is where a lot of kids in the town would bury their animals. Fishes, dogs, cats, hamsters, gerbils, whatever it is, they pretty much have buried them there. There was a fish, yes. And so, Church dies, and it's kind of like, okay, do I finally tell her about death? Rachel and him have gotten in fights kind of at this point throughout the book about like certain things, and like death is like one of them. And that leads me to I did not really like Rachel the first 2 times I read this book. Mainly because I feel like the actions of this book could have been all avoided if Rachel had simply, kind of let death be talked about in the family. But the more I kind of think about it with the whole Zelda situation, I kind of can see your side as a traumatizing thing as a child dealing with death like that. And you don't want to traumatize your own kid with death and stuff like that. And, it's a whole, death is natural just as much as childbirth is natural. And it's a sensitive subject, I will say that much. But I personally am a believer that if death was allowed to be talked about, maybe half of this book could have been avoided. I'm not saying Gage's death could have been avoided, but the repercussions of what happened maybe could have been avoided. And again, I mentioned that there were going to be spoilers, so if you just heard me mention about Gage dying, you should have already been warned about that. So, don't. But yeah, so Church dies, and Judd is like, your daughter really loves that cat. Maybe there's a better way. And so Judd shows Lewis the Micmac burial ground, which is beyond the deadfall of the pet cemetery. And earlier in the book, a character named Victor Pascow dies. It's like, I think it's Lewis's first day at on campus, and guy gets hit by a car and is absolutely just dead. Comes back to life briefly, like as a ghost, like, and has been like talking throughout some of this book about showing Lewis, like, don't go over the deadfall, don't go beyond there, like, it's not good, don't go over there. Judd takes him over there after Church dies. They go to the Micmac burial ground. There's a creature called the Wendigo that is mentioned, and like what the lore is behind that creature, and you know, it's just some loons. It's just loons. And Church comes back, and he's kind of different. Church used to be loving and caring even after he got his nuts chopped off. And Church is now, I mean, besides the fact he smells, which gets brought up a lot, because obviously he was buried and is dead, obviously. But he acts differently. He's a little more vicious, and not like, you know, keeps bringing home dead animals and stuff like that. Dead rats, mice, all that kind of crap. So then comes the part that is probably the saddest part of, probably one of the top saddest parts of any King book. Gage Creed is killed, and it's utterly heartbreaking. There's a chapter before that, like I mentioned, where Gage and Lewis are, you know, kind of having a really fun time. They're flying a kite, and, you know, I'm just, anytime Gage talks in this book, it's just like, so, it's like starting to like hit me right now too. Like it's really depressing, especially after you've had a kid. First two times I was able to talk about this with not that many issues, but it's, you know, just imagining, you know, you don't want to imagine it. It is ideally the short of that. You don't want to imagine going through this, especially, you know, I've got a son now, and it's depressing to like read this and like hear what happens. And Gage gets hit by one of the Renko trucks, and the whole aspect of, you know, Lewis was just this close to saving him, and it's sad. So ultimately, Lewis is heartbroken. The whole family's heartbroken. There's a fight at the funeral between Lewis and Irwin, Rachel's dad, Irwin. And I like I said, I hate her parents. Her parents suck. Rachel, you know, more of an understandable character this time around, but I still don't, I just don't agree. I'll leave it at that. And, you know, so Lewis is thinking about it. You know, Church came back, and Judd sees him like that same night. He's like, I know you're thinking about, you know, I buried my dog Spot up there. No human's been buried up there. Then after Gage dies, it's a human has been buried up there. And that's the only, you know, there's one that I know of. And I forget what his name is. Baderman? Teddy Baderman? I think that's what his name is. And he comes back, and he's not the same. He's this weird demonic presence. There's some weird entity that kind of like is in him. And he like, you know, this is back when Judd was younger. Him and a couple of his friends were going to go and put a stop to the abomination of what came back. And this thing just starts spewing just like evil, like saying like, oh yeah, no, your wife's screwing everybody in town, and you're this and you're that. And they get absolutely terrified and they flee. Eventually the dad comes around to like, yeah, this is a monster, and he kills him. But Lewis is thinking about it, and he's thinking about putting Gage up there. And there's signs pointing that he's, you know, inadvertently thought about it. And Judd, this is when he tells him, like, I inadvertently killed your son. If I didn't show you this place, you know, the place, you know, gives you sweet reasons to come back to it. And that's ultimately, like, why Judd was like, yeah, that's why I did it with the cat. You know, I did it with my dog. I never used it again. But I know people who have, because it's been shown to me. It's been shown to others. You know, people know about it. And I know you're thinking about putting Gage up there, but don't do it. They don't come back the same. And Lewis sends his family to Chicago to see the parents. And yeah, he makes an attempt to do that. I'll cut this part short just because it's quick and easy. Gage gets buried up in the pet cemetery, in the Micmac burial grounds. He comes back, murders Judd, psychedelically, well, like, psychedelically, whatever. In her head, Ellie's been thinking something's going on with Dad. Victor Panskow is like, what, or like Panskow, Paxkow. Like, she's saying the name wrong, and finally Rachel's like, oh my god, Victor Pascow, that's who you're talking about. And so she's trying to go back home. A lot of things delay her. She gets there eventually, and she listens to what Judd said. Judd said, come to my house when you get here. Don't go see Lewis. Goes to her house. Gage is there. Just killed Judd. Kills Mom. Kills Rachel. And then eventually Lewis wakes up from taking his nap after burying his son up there. He goes over and sees there's a random car in Judd's house, realizes it's Rachel. Rachel came home. And he goes over there as a final, in the movie there's a bit of more of a confrontation between Lewis and the entity or Gage. In the book, he basically, he jumps at him, he stops him, pretty much pins him to the ground and stabs him with a syringe and kills him. But in the movie, there's a bit more of a fight, and Lewis gets stabbed a lot. So, but Lewis has not learned his lesson because he thinks he waited too long with Gage. Rachel just died. Rachel is going to be better, going to be different. He burns down Judd's house. People start showing up. One of the friends of Lewis, I don't remember what his name is, Steve something, Masterton, arrives and sees somebody going up into the woods towards the pet cemetery. And it's Lewis, and Lewis has white hair. And the ending of this book, Rachel comes back. It's probably not Rachel, and I can guarantee you Lewis probably dies. So I'm giving this 5 stars, like I said, and spoilers are pretty much done. The only thing that I would say, I have a lingering question with this book. What happens to Ellie? What happens to Ellie Creed in this book? Because she's with her grandparents in Chicago still. And I know I mentioned this when I did my Institute video, but what happened to Ellie Creed? Has she been mentioned in anything since this book? Is she still out there? Could there be a sequel at some point with Ellie Creed? What happened to her? She just kind of, she was left there by her mom with her grandparents. Mom's dead, little brother's dead, cat's dead, dad's dead. I don't know. What happened to Ellie Creed? I feel like that's a good, fair question to ask. Where does it rank in my Stephen King ranking? I don't know. My number one's 11/22/63. Then I have The Shining, It, and Pet Sematary. That was the order I had them in. Is this better than It? I don't think it's better than The Shining. I would say this is number 3. I'm going to move this in front of It. I do need to reread It, and honestly, when I do that, it might go back to 4th. I don't know. My top 4 suck. They literally could be, any of these 4 in my top 4 could be number 1 on anyone else's list, or on my list if I had not read the other 3. And it sucks. I really hate that aspect of my life, of dealing with Stephen King. So, Pet Sematary, I'm going to say it's number 3 right now. I'm going to put it in front of It. I know that's diabolical and oh, you can't do that. Well, whatever. Screw it. So, screw It. Literally. So there you have my long rant of Pet Sematary and how the book kind of goes. And again, I'm giving it 5 stars. This is my 3rd favorite Stephen King book of all time. Honestly, I would say it's probably tied with It. It's a 50-50 toss-up. I can flip a coin and one day it could be the other. Whatever. I really like this book. It's really dark, it's really scary, and it's really good. So, again, sometimes dead is better. There you have my review of Stephen King's Pet Sematary. Alright guys, so that is my rant review on Pet Sematary by Stephen King. Again, I mentioned a lot of spoilers, I mentioned a lot of stuff, and if you agree with me or disagree with me on anything, let me know in the comments down below. If you've read this book, let me know if you agree with some of the stuff I said, like I just mentioned. What are your thoughts on this book? And do you think it's Stephen King's scariest book? I would say that's between this and Revival. That is 100% sure. But yeah, very good stuff. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Also check out the links down below. Patreon, podcast, Bookstagram, Danielle's channel, all that fun stuff. And we will link this book down below as well. And I definitely need to look at that new cover and possibly get one. But yeah, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.